Hello, and welcome to my video on the January 2019 Algebra 2 Regions, question number 7. Here we have that, or we're told, that tides are a periodic rise and fall of ocean water. On a typical day at a seaport, to predict the time of the next high tide, the most important value to have would be and then we're presented with 4 different choices. So the first thing perhaps to notice here, they make mention of the fact that tides are periodic. So unfortunately, when you hear the word periodic, you should be thinking about trig functions, and specifically like sine or cosine. And as we did this here, the graphs of our sine and cosine functions and the different aspects of them can be used to model different situations, such as the height of water. So if we recall the basic shape of our sine or cosine graph, especially in this case here where perhaps the x-axis is time, the y-axis would measure the height of our water. If we're talking about a sine curve, we know that sine starts in the middle and then it goes up and then down and then back up to the midline, and then this could continue happening over and over and over again. That's why it's referred to as periodic. And the cosine graph has the same shape to it. It starts at the high point, but it has the same tendency of going up and down and up and down. Now, the thing is, whether it's sine or cosine, each of these graphs have what we refer to as the period of our sine graph. And the period of your sine or cosine graph is how long does it take to complete one full cycle. And you can see this in different ways. And the sine graph, since it starts in the middle and we go up and then down and then back up again, this length from the origin to this point here on the x-axis would represent the period. But another way to look at the period perhaps is to look at from a high point to another high point, that distance there, that length would also represent the period. But that should also be equal to perhaps from one low point to another low point, that distance there also should represent one period. So the period, again, is how long does it take for our graph to repeat itself, and that's the key feature that would help us determine the time of the next high tide. Because if we know the length of the period, we can then determine from whatever vantage point we may be at, how long is it going to take to get to that high point. So if, as is mentioned in choice number 1, we know the time between consecutive low tides, because that would tell us perhaps this length here and thus the period of our graph, from that information we can then easily determine the time at which we would have the next high tide. And so choice 1 is the answer to this particular problem. All the other choices in this problem deal with certain aspects of our sine graph or cosine graph, if we're looking at that, but they would not be helpful in determining the time that it would require to get to the next high tide. And again, that's why choice 1 is the answer for this problem. I hope that this video helped you out with this question, and thank you for watching, and take care.